Hi, and welcome to episode 38 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott. I'm the editor of TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. We have here a strain called Platinum Girl Scout Cookies. It's kind of been taking the dispensary world by storm, especially here on the West Coast. I found these flowers at the bargain rate of $8 a gram at a place called Evergreen Health Center in Bremerton. The reason I got such a good deal is that they are lightly seeded flowers, but that is actually not a problem, as there are usually only one or two seeds per bud, and also I don't mind having those genetics on hand. Great deal. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States this week, President Obama announced that he plans clemency for hundreds and perhaps thousands of prisoners who have been sentenced for drug law violations. A White House official told Yahoo News that the president is prepared to use his pardon power to grant clemency to hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who have been jailed for nonviolent drug crimes. The report said that the administration is making moves that will help it handle the increase in petitions that Mr. Obama is planning to sign off on before he leaves office. Last Tuesday, White House counsel Catherine Rumler said Obama has directed the Department of Justice to improve its clemency recommendation process and to recruit more applications from convicts. The White House's new moves would follow in the footsteps of a January announcement that the Obama administration would be taking the unprecedented step of encouraging defense lawyers to suggest inmates whom the president might let out of prison early as part of its effort to curtail severe penalties in low-level drug cases. In December, President Obama commuted the sentences of 8 federal inmates convicted of nonviolent drug offenses involving crack cocaine. Obama said the 8 men and women had been sentenced under an unfair system, including the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine offenses that was reduced to 18-to-1 by the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010. In the past year, Attorney General Eric Holder has made a number of forceful public statements against mass incarceration in the United States, promising significant rollback of mandatory minimums and harsh sentencing guidelines. Yet, despite his administration's declared support for substantive criminal justice reform, until now Obama has used his power to grant clemency less frequently than nearly all other U.S. presidents. There are still too many people in federal prison who were sentenced under the old regime, and who as a result will have to spend far more time in prison than they would if sentenced today for exactly the same crime, Holder said in a Monday video address. President Obama has been under significant public pressure from advocacy groups and family members of people who are serving mandatory minimum drug sentences. This would be a positive step towards righting the wrongs of our broken criminal justice system, according to Anthony Papa, Media Relations Manager for the Drug Policy Alliance. Anthony was granted clemency in New York State in 1997 after he served 12 years in prison under the notorious Rockefeller drug laws. I hope governors with the same power at the state level will follow his lead and reunite more families, Papa said. With 500,000 people still behind bars on nonviolent drug charges, clearly thousands are deserving of a second chance, according to Papa. Congress should act immediately to reduce the draconian federal mandatory minimum sentences that condemn thousands to decades behind bars for nonviolent drug offenses. Also in the United States this week, an advocacy group says if the United States really wants prison reform, we should start by releasing nonviolent drug offenders who are serving life sentences. What do a former Indy 500 Rookie of the Year, an Illinois truck mechanic, and a Southern California teacher have in common? Well, they're all serving life sentences in federal prison for nonviolent marijuana offenses. Most of the public doesn't know about this. They don't know that right here, right now, in the United States, we have prisoners serving life or de facto life sentences for nonviolent cannabis offenses. For some, like the 1986 Indy 500 Rookie of the Year Randy Lanier and Chicago truck mechanic Craig Cecil, these were their first offenses. Lanier, Cecil, and others like Paul Free, Larry Duke, and George Martirano are part of an aging prison population who have been incarcerated for decades for victimless crimes involving a plant that many states are now legalizing. A new Change.org petition penned by Beth Curtis of LifeForPot.com, whose brother John Knock is one of these prisoners, offers an easy way the president could remedy the situation: grant mass clemency to nonviolent drug offenders serving life sentences. The petition models its suggestion on historical mass clemencies like those granted by Presidents Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter to Selective Service Act violators during the Vietnam War. Systemic clemency has been used frequently throughout the history of our country and is a presidential tool and responsibility that is usually used to restore justice when retribution has caused a rift in the social fabric. The war on drugs is our contemporary example of this excess. Author, cannabis reform activist, and petition campaign manager Sherry Sicard says Curtis's simple common sense solution is something nearly everyone can agree on. Young and old, rich and poor, Democrat and Republican, hardly anyone thinks it is a good idea to waste tax dollars locking nonviolent senior citizen marijuana offenders away for life. The petition leaves the debate clemency to the president's discretion, leave the details of clemency to the president's discretion, but includes suggestions for reasonable guidelines, such as group commutation for those who have served 10 years and or reached the age of 60. Curtis and Sicard debated the wisdom of including all nonviolent drug offenders serving life in the petition, and ultimately opted to do so as the public is no longer complacent about the sentencing disparity between crack cocaine, and the president has shown sympathy towards and granted clemency for some crack cocaine prisoners caught in this sentencing gap. In these cases, the petition simply suggests the president commute life sentences when time served equals the time of the incarceration for the same weight cocaine offenses under present-day law. The organizers, along with the families of those serving life sentences, are hoping for a strong show of public support on this petition, with the plans to use it to bolster new clemency efforts currently being drafted. It only makes logical sense to stop the cruel and unusual practice of incarcerating inmates for life for nonviolent, victimless crimes, said Sherry Sicard. This petition will spread awareness of an issue most Americans don't even realize exists, as well as gather supporters to help in efforts to finally get these men released, while they still have a few years left to spend with their loved ones. A study released results this week showing that legalizing marijuana doesn't increase pot use among adolescents. One common refrain that we hear from those opposed to medical marijuana is that its legalization would likely increase use among adolescents, but a new study indicates that's just not true. According to this study from Rhode Island Hospital, which compared 20 years of data from states with and without medical marijuana laws, legalizing cannabis for medicinal use did not lead to any increased use among adolescents, reports Science Daily. The study is published online and will be in the upcoming print issue of the Journal of Adolescent Health. Anytime a state considers legalizing medical marijuana, there are concerns from the public about an increase in drug use among teens, according to Esther Chu, MD, attending physician in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Rhode Island Hospital. In this study, she said, we examined 20 years worth of data, comparing trends in self-reported adolescent marijuana use between states with medical marijuana laws and neighboring states without the laws, and we found no increases in marijuana use that could be attributed to the law. This adds to a growing body of literature published over the past 3 years that is remarkably consistent in demonstrating that state medical marijuana policies do not have a downstream effect on adolescent drug use, and we feared they might, Dr. Chu said. The study looked at a sample of 32,750 high school students. According to the data, past month marijuana use was common, with nearly 21% of the study population admitting to toking up in the past 30 days. But there were no statistically significant differences in cannabis use before and after medical marijuana legalization. Researchers should continue to monitor and measure marijuana use, Chu said, but we hope that this information will provide some level of reassurance to policymakers, physicians, and parents about medical marijuana laws. In Massachusetts, lawmakers plan to hold a hearing on a bill that would regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol. The Massachusetts Joint Committee on the Judiciary will hold a hearing on Thursday on a bill that would make possession of limited amounts of marijuana legal for adults, and it would establish a system in which marijuana is regulated and taxed, similarly to alcohol. House Bill 1632 would eliminate criminal penalties for adults 21 years of age and older if they possess or cultivate marijuana for personal use. It would also create a cannabis control authority, which will establish licenses, collect taxes, and regulate the production, processing, and sale of marijuana to adults. Marijuana prohibition has been just as colossal a failure as alcohol prohibition, according to Matt Simon, New England political director for the Marijuana Policy Project. Matt is scheduled to testify during the hearing. He said that marijuana is less toxic than alcohol, less addictive, and less likely to contribute to violent or reckless behavior. Most voters think it's time to stop punishing adults who make the safer choice, and we hope their elected officials will agree, he said. A majority of Massachusetts voters likely to vote in the November 2014 midterm election, 53%, support making marijuana legal, according to a poll released in February, with just 37% opposed. In Alabama, a disturbing ruling from the Supreme Court this week. The Supreme Court there in the heart of Dixie ruled that women can be arrested for using drugs while pregnant. The Alabama Supreme Court on Friday issued this 8-1 decision in Ex parte Hicks, upholding the conviction of Sarah Hicks, who gave birth to a healthy baby who tested positive for cocaine in 2008. This decision affirmed the court's prior ruling in Ankrum, holding that the plain meaning of the word child in Alabama law unambiguously includes fertilized eggs, and that pregnant women may be arrested for using a controlled substance while pregnant. The chemical endangerment law was passed in 2006 to deter people from bringing children to places where controlled substances are produced or distributed, such as meth labs. Since 2006, more than 100 women who became pregnant and then tested positive for a controlled substance have been arrested in Alabama. Some have experienced pregnancy losses, but the majority, like Sarah Hicks, have continued their pregnancies to term, and they've given birth to healthy children. As a result of the rulings in Ankrum and in Hicks, there is no exception from prosecution for pregnant women who use controlled substances, even when prescribed by physicians. Because Justice Moore's concurring opinion in Hicks relies on biblical citations and God's authority, the decision may also raise First Amendment Establishment Clause questions. Chief Justice Moore wrote a separate concurring opinion to emphasize that the inalienable right to life is a gift from God. That's a quote. That not only justifies the decision in Hicks, but also requires that Roe v. Wade be overturned and that pregnant women be punished, whether they use a controlled substance or terminate a pregnancy. Justice Parker wrote a special concurring opinion to explain how the Hicks case fits into, quote, a line of decisions affirming Alabama's recognition of the sanctity of life from the earliest stages of development and equating a woman who has an abortion to a, quote, killer. It is very unusual for a state Supreme Court to take a case to address a settled issue of law, according to Lynn Paltrow, founder and executive director of National Advocates for Pregnant Women. It appears that the court accepted the Hicks case for the purpose of more fully articulating a view that pregnant women are proper subjects of Alabama's criminal justice system and a growing state and national system of mass incarceration. With the Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court now on record as viewing both women who give birth to healthy babies and women who have abortions as criminals, it is time for proponents of anti-abortion laws and so-called personhood measures to address the punishment women will be subjected to as a result of these policy proposals, according to Paltrow. According to the majority and the concurring opinions, Alabama purports to affirm the sanctity of life by establishing a separate and unequal law for pregnant women, creating unique and additional criminal penalties in relationship to drug use. These decisions empower police, prosecutors, and prison wardens to oversee prenatal care and motherhood, and by adopting policies that every leading medical group warns will undermine the health, safety, and well-being of children born and unborn. Such prosecutions of pregnant women are misguided because they treat drug use and addiction as a moral failing that will respond to threats of punishment, according to Tamar Todd, senior staff attorney at the Drug Policy Alliance. The health of women and children will be improved if pregnant women are given access to medical care and treatment rather than deterred from seeking it through threats of imprisonment. As a result of these decisions in the Ancrum and Hicks cases, Alabama joined South Carolina as one of only 2 states that authorized the prosecution of pregnant women. In Mississippi this week, the governor there signed a law to allow marijuana-derived CBD oil for seizures. Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant last week signed into law a bill allowing marijuana-derived CBD oil for medicinal purposes. The bill I signed into law will help children who suffer from severe seizure disorders, Governor Bryant said. Throughout the legislative process, I insisted on the tightest controls and regulations for this measure, and I have been assured by the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics that CBD oil, cannabidiol, is not an intoxicant, the governor said. The outcome is a bill that allows this substance to be used therapeutically, as is the case for other controlled prescription medication, he said, emphasizing that he remains opposed to any effort to legalize marijuana or any of its derivatives other than CBD oil only. The bill was named for Harper Grace Derville, who turned 2 years old last Friday, usually the age when Dravet syndrome, a severe form of epilepsy, starts resulting in an increased number of seizures. She has them every day, but they are not grand mal seizures, and they are very, very short, said Ashley, Harper's mother. Hopefully, this will lead the way to some groundbreaking insight into not only children with epilepsy, but any other neurological disorder, according to State Senator Josh Harkins, who pushed the measure. Unfortunately, there won't be any actual CBD oil helping any actual kids for some time, if ever, under the flawed law, with several more hurdles to clear before any medicine is dispensed. Now that the governor has signed it, according to the language of the law, federal officials have to approve how the CBD oil is distributed. That will probably never happen since marijuana and all its derivatives, even the non-psychoactive ones like CBD, are considered Schedule I controlled substances under federal law. In the unlikely event that the federal government does sign off on it, the next steps will be handled by the University of Mississippi and its medical center. Similarly written laws in other states have so far never resulted in a single child receiving a single dose of CBD oil, because over and over the universities involved have declined to participate in marijuana research, unwilling to endanger their federal funding. Which brings us to our next story from Toke Signals this week. CBD-only legislation doesn't equal real medical marijuana laws. It was my honor to co-write this piece with Dr. Gil Mobley, a very knowledgeable man and a very passionate advocate for medical marijuana. He's one of the best friends medical marijuana patients ever had. Dr. Mobley and I wrote this piece together, as I said. A tipping point has been reached in modern medicine where the medical utility of cannabis can no longer be denied in a wide variety of diseases. It effectively treats dozens of ailments from neurological conditions like multiple sclerosis and epilepsy to inflammatory conditions such as Crohn's disease and chronic pain. Miraculously, it can also stop seizures other medications can't touch. Patients in 21 states in the District of Columbia have legal access to this medicine, and their efforts are underway in scores of other states where legislators are seeking access to medical cannabis for patients with certain well-defined conditions. Public support for medical cannabis remains high throughout the country. Recently, support for medical cannabis has soared even more after Dr. Sanjay Gupta's series on CNN highlighted his about-face on the subject. In part 2 of his series called Weed that aired last month, the physician discussed his transition from a doubter to a staunch advocate for the use of medical cannabis, along with the need for further research. I am more convinced than ever that it is irresponsible to not provide the best care we can, care that often may involve marijuana, Dr. Gupta said. The effects of tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, are the most well-known of the cannabinoids. It's the compound responsible for the high of cannabis, as well as its important anti-inflammatory and anti-tumoral effects. Non-psychoactive cannabidiol, or CBD as it's more popularly known, is the new darling of lawmakers in conservative states who sense the rising tide of popular support for medical marijuana and would love to appear to be doing something, but lack the political courage or will to advocate for an actual medical marijuana law. CBD, you see, is politically safe because as a non-psychoactive component of cannabis, it doesn't get anyone high. And better yet, it helps to quell seizures of the kind often found in pediatric epilepsy. So this combination of helping kids and it doesn't get you high has proven an end for medical marijuana in what would otherwise have been quite forbidding places, such as the halls of power in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Now, when suffering kids, sometimes dealing with hundreds of seizures a day, find relief, that's a wonderful thing. We owe it to these youngsters and their families to do everything we can to ameliorate their suffering, and we applaud all efforts to do so. But the disquieting fact about these no political risk types of laws, Alabama's, for example, passed unanimously in both chambers amidst much self-congratulation, was that A, they are written so narrowly as to help only a handful of children, or perhaps none at all, according to some critics, and B, all of the dozens of cannabinoids found in marijuana work most effectively in a synergistic fashion, potentiating each other's medical benefits and what Dr. Sanjay Gupta has called the entourage effect. That makes it absolutely vital from a scientific and medical viewpoint that we include more than a measly 2 of the likely dozens, possibly even hundreds of cannabinoids that contribute to the medicinal benefits of cannabis. The synergistic power of the cannabinoids working together in various ratios to both potentiate and ameliorate specific outcomes represents one of the most promising areas of modern medical research. More than 85 different cannabinoids have already been isolated from cannabis, with many more likely to come. Additionally, legislators who pass these CBD-only laws seem to be unaware that it doesn't even have to be a high CBD strain to treat pediatric seizures without getting kids high. Raw THC, that is THC which hasn't been decarboxylated by exposure to heat, that is to say THCA or THC acid, has also been shown in early testing to quell seizures, and it isn't psychoactive until it is converted to THC by heating. That's important information for struggling parents who may not be able to afford the sky-high price of CBD oil. These prices, which are unfortunately occurring due to the media frenzy over cannabidiol and the attendant speculative environment for its sale. THC-rich strains of marijuana are much more affordable. Here on the brink of one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs of the 21st century, it would be a tragedy to lose much of the incredible medical potential of the cannabis plant by buckling to the political pressure of CBD-only legislation. Let's follow the science where it takes us. Before we go this week, we have a must-read article from the wonderful Sharon Letts, and this is fresh out from her, brand new. Cannabis Deliver Us from Illness, A Day in the Life of an Educated Stoner. And what Sharon does with this great article, you will be amazed at the amount of useful information she's included. What she does is create a morning to night list of delivery options to help you get the most from cannabis. And when she talks about delivery options, she's talking about the various methods of cannabis administration, including smoking, topicals that you apply to your skin, smoothies through which you ingest raw cannabis, and a number of other administration methods, which you'll find out about in the article. I'm sure you'll enjoy that, and I'm sure you'll learn as much as I did from it. I hope you decide to join us again next week for Toke Signals. Until then, my advice is to stay lifted.